okay, I'm a social anthropologist, and this is sort of my part-time study to avoid studying violence and coffee production in Colombia, and it's all turned rather serious. So I'll just crack on. Those are questions. It's a one-slide show, so those are questions you can mull over as we go through the presentation. So I got into this. We came to the Breaking Convention a couple of years ago, and we looked at the medical cannabis bike tour, which was a little study we were doing into cannabis and sport. And the bike tour was fundraising, ironically, for, you saw it on a slide there, for Manuel Guzman and Guillermo Velasco's cannabis research in Complutense University in Madrid. But the bike ride was the cannabis sector. It was the cannabis industry, the seed producers, the fertilizer companies, the hydroponic companies, rolling papers, publishers. It was them who were funding this research at that time, and they still are, and go to Wallacea if you want to be part of it. And through those efforts, and these are the people I've been talking to, and through their efforts, really, you have your cannabis. They're the ones who provide your cannabis, albeit indirectly. All legal economies integrate with illegal economies. It's not just drugs. There are flows of goods, finances, and services. So this sector, in a way, produced much of the cannabis in Europe. And through this work, I've attended trade shows and talked to stallholders. I've met end users too, and I try different products as they're recommended. I'm not a great drug user. My tolerances are quite low, but especially compared to habitual consumers. But I'm got to say it, and I'll say it to the camera, I'm very grateful to these people for sort of letting me into their world. It's sort of, it's a slightly ambivalent world, if you like, and they've let me in, and I'm very grateful, and they are very good people, without exception. I really like them. So let's go through it. There's something not quite clean about the cannabis trade, though. They struggle to be legitimate. In Mary Douglas's words, they're dirt, they're matter out of place. Morality, ambivalence, and uncertainty hangs over the cannabis user. One Dutch trader told me that he does not tell the parents of his daughter's school friends that he works in the industry, even though his job is 100% legal under Dutch law. The former Secretary General of Ghana told me at a drug conference, the people who smoke this are dirty. We call the stuff weed. On the bike tour this year, we stopped off for lunch in a car park by a river in rural Holland. But we're moved on almost immediately because of the cannabis users. We're not welcome, we're outsiders. Much consumption and production in Europe happens outside of state legal sanction. There's an estimated 22 million users of cannabis in Europe, 10% of those from the UK. Apparently there's a £1 billion pound turnover expenditure in the UK on cannabis. The struggle for legitimacy takes place while the goods of legal traders in the cannabis trade are entering criminal economy. Cannabis trading has a modern history of illegality and has cultured meanings of use and trade that straddle into categories of unacceptability and danger. Yet categorization is dependent upon position. We differentiate and distinguish according to our own individual and collective histories. And note, categories of transgression can change again or switch back, sometimes very quickly. For Janet Reutemann, questions about legitimacy need to be addressed by understanding the economy as a political terrain. Illegal sectors operate within legal sectors. There's substantial integration. At times, they can even be the heart of productive activity. In those unofficial economies, you can be in the margins and in the norm. Reutemann is reminding us that the boom in cannabis medicines has come out of an illegal sector that considered itself legitimate. The cannabis industry, by incorporating modern technological horticulture, including genetic modification, has innovated new strains, growing techniques, and processing methods. Together with activists operating a cottage industry of self-appointed providers of cannabis treatments, this productive activity has brought us sufficient anecdotal evidence to steer medical research and contribute towards knowledge on producing cannabinoid concentrates. The scientific researchers I spoke to do not disengage entirely from anecdotal evidence. They use it to help direct them. So what sort of economy does reform fit into? Researchers found that localized drug traffickers mastered the arts of transgression and discovered the significance of an economy of consumption. The money to be made through transgression fitted into existing cultural economies of consumption. By reordering the points of transgression, reform widens the consumption opportunities. Business as usual, but now the production of wealth is sanctioned by the state. And as such, reform offers the existing cannabis sector the potential of greater trade and profits, and a more direct route for that capital to circulate. But individual profiteering is insufficient in itself for reform. For Parry and Block, perceived benefits to the collective whole are positively associated with central moral values of the group, whereas individual profit is only allowed within certain limits. Or, as a veteran on the bike tour said more succinctly, if you don't give something back to society, they come and get you. Reform based on models of medicine, taxation and reduction in law and order costs appeal to augmenting the collective whole, but that is within a particular form of economy. Hugh Jones makes an argument that we cannot understand drug taking by indigenous groups in the Amazon using our own social and cosmological ordering. But that also works in reverse. We need to understand our own cultural economy to understand legitimization of drug use here. And we live in times of neoliberal drives that defer government responsibilities to private enterprise chasing profits. This is accompanied by mass commodity consumption, which has an underlying ethos that, quote, the economy produces goods, and goods are goods. Goods are good, so I'll start again. The economy produces goods, and goods are good. So more goods must be better. Multinationals and small-time entrepreneurs see the opportunities of profits to be gained in more relaxed laws. This is what reform is shaping into, and it comes at a price. For Huub Oeman of NCOD, the signs are ominous. After years campaigning for reform, he has seen many of the non-profit cannabis social clubs turn into profit-making organisations with private investors. In the US, some of the same people who were campaigning for reform and are now legal commercial growers are currently lobbying in Washington to prevent private growing in order to secure their own profits. So what does reform mean in a time of global corporates and mass consumption? Consumption has been identified by scholars as formative of identity. So how will the commoditization of medical and recreational meanings of cannabis shape our interface with our social and material worlds? Well, let's take a look a bit more at what's going on. There's new investors. Stockmark in venture capital has entered the US cannabis business. Robert Farrell is the marketing strategist for CanLabs, a stock market listed company in Denver, Colorado, that does cannabis testing and helps the state and industry drafting new regulations. Robert previously worked leading marketing strategies for the Royal Bank of Scotland. He doesn't smoke. He's just not that kind of person. He's there to do a job, making money for the company and for himself. By comparison, in Europe, there's not the legal infrastructure to accommodate this type of company, nor are there people like him visible in the industry. Instead, there are many hedonists partying hard and taking it easy in their sunset years. Those who don't smoke now used to smoke before, and the more successful business people, however, don't get that wasted on the job. When we compare Europe and America, it's quite interesting. I went to Spannabis, Europe's largest cannabis trade show, which is held in Barcelona. In the adjoining building, they were holding the World Cannabis Conferences and had invited American speakers to provide inside analysis into the cannabis economy, new regulations, and to provide business advice. The hall was almost empty. Everyone was partying hard and selling products next door. Farrell was adjusting slowly to Europe's old-style approach. He said, they're only into human rights to consume. They don't actually offer anything. Well, it's not strictly true. There's much marketing of medical cannabis, but that US business ethos has not carried through. The medicalization on the discourse on cannabis has been adopted by the industry, albeit with the occasional bit of cynical marketing. For instance, one product has the strapline, the strongest medicine in the world. One cannabis entrepreneur was advising people, never refer to marijuana, always say medical marijuana. But by comparison with the US, Europe has been slow to catch on. And people are changing how they see cannabis. I spoke to one woman, she said, I've always had a smoke before I go to bed. I thought it was fun, but now I realise it helps me sleep. Someone else said, When I used to get stressed, I wondered whether to smoke and forget about it or work out my feelings without the weed. But now I can see that it is a medicine, so I tend to medicate myself. Medicalization and US health concerns about smoking have helped drive the development of concentrates, and those concentrates make up the 59% of Colorado marijuana sales, because 59% of those marijuana sales are edibles. Now I come across people who carry little dropper bottles or syringes without needles filled with tinctures and oils of THC, CBD, or blends of selected cannabinoids. In my limited experience, they are remarkably strong and with a large variation in effect. One producer of these medical oils told me that the technology to blend different cannabinoids now allowed for a vast array of different combinations of compound and dose. And degrees of quality in cultivation and processing, he said, also affected experience. So I think the debate which we heard Val do on Channel 4 some time ago about skunk and hash has been rather overtaken by events. We look at research and development. Research into cannabinoids is not restricted to the institutional laboratory governed by a history of disciplinary discussion and management committees. Research and development on cannabis and the concentrations of cannabinoids is also a cottage industry, and for some it's a proud craft. Part of that development includes the extraction of cannabinoids while increasing the purity. This helps focus and standardise treatments and trials. A product of about 90% pure THC, I am told, is now available. The medicalisation of cannabis is helping to develop products that do to cannabis what cocaine did to coca. They are changing the profile of the original object substantially. And what we don't know yet is how that might change the culture of current cannabis using communities or groups. In the more institutionalised sectors of university research labs and global pharmaceuticals, cannabis is not the magic bullet evangelised by the needs of cannabis reformers, media hype and industry marketing. Instead, it's another drug for research, trial and development, mostly in conjunction with other existing remedies. Cannabis could possibly make the pharmaceutical companies lots of money, but they already have lots of money. Allopathic medicine is less attached to the herbal origins of the plant than the chemistry derived from it. Research scientists I've spoken to are not set on using herbal cannabis to obtain cannabinoids. Chemically identical synthetic cannabinoids might offer a more cost-effective and standardised alternative over herbal derivatives. And then we have products like Sativex, which are ultimately far too easy to copy, especially with such a large cottage industry. Jeff Ditchfield will go around showing you how he's made a better product than Sativex. Big Pharma either needs more effective prohibition, which is hard without popular consensus, or more sophisticated cannabis-based drugs. Cannabis medicine is currently of far greater importance to the cannabis industry than the pharmaceutical industry. The medical cannabis bike toy is a novel funding system in an area of marginal medical interest. That's why a bunch of cannabis traders on bikes are now pioneering medical research. Medical research wasn't pioneering it. By the way, the Guzman thing was about to close down prior to their money. I believe what the cannabis industry and activists want is the development of cannabis medicines of herbal origins, preferably without piggybacking it onto existing chemotherapies. That would provide a clear terrain of legitimacy to circulate the previously dangerous object. In this scenario, cannabis contributes to society's healing unproductive bodies, saving healthcare costs, increasing economic output, and all sanctioned by the current dominant scientific model. Increasing legalisation means greater potential collaborative partnerships between scientific research and development and the cannabis industry. But that will depend on the quality of skills in the cannabis sector that has historically relied on marketing over integrity. Seed breeders, and it has to be said, are the superstars of the cannabis world. They travel, they promote, and egos rage. It's a bit like academia in many ways. One horticulturist told me that the cannabis genetics are actually not that well developed. They're rather weak. And most breeders in other industries, for example carrots, are horticultural geeks. They don't go around travelling and promoting themselves. Meanwhile, key strains and well-known brands are currently in the front line to be bought out by some very big money. And as all this happens, the plurality of legalisations and local legislations and local prohibition practices across Europe change with astonishing speed. What is legal one day may be illegal the next. Your business and years of investment can end up in a space of illegality as the line of the law moves in. Seeds and growing equipment in the forefront of changing governmental approaches. In Amsterdam, one business said, "They can't wait to close us down. I now have to see a lawyer to see if my employees are going to be liable if there's a problem." Businesses see competitors shut down by the state and sit and wait for the same thing to happen to them. What they are allowed to sell has been greatly reduced. Yet the government does not offer to compensate them for loss of business, nor assist them in meeting the new regulations. It is an exercise of power that has little consideration for how these people will meet their existing economic commitments. Inevitably, some of those who fail to adjust to the new legal regime will adjust to the new illegal one. The Dutch cannabis sector emerged as a consequence of legal measures to contain the dirt and danger ascribed to the circulation and consumption of the plant. As such, it always shared a space with other economies similarly ascribed, i.e., criminal productive activity. The move from legal regulated trading to illegal unregulated trading will, for some, be quite simple. Yet almost all the people I've spoken to in the industry put enormous energy into staying within the law. Some have migrated to Spain, others to the United States. Some spent enormous time and money remarketing products to comply with the law. The view of danger and subversive behaviour of them is wrong. They work very hard, travelling trade show circuits in Europe and now in America and South America too. They try to stay legal in a business made risky by unstable, fragmented regulation that at one point widens sales opportunities and at other times closes them down. As the US market grows and builds a strong infrastructure of production, transportation, investment and regulation, some of their European competitors are struggling to sustain their businesses. Connections with the sanctioned wealth of government and pharmaceutical contracts may not only be the route to riches, it could become the only means of survival. And we're dealing with particular ways of doing economy. The illegality of cannabis networks. Cannabis produces socially embedded trading networks through dealer-consumer relations. Gary Potter's work shows that illegal cannabis is not an alienated product. Gary Potter's work shows that illegal cannabis is not an alienated product, but is circulated through gift relations and fluid vendor-purchaser roles. Similarly, alternative medicine has a far greater degree of forging personal relations in treatment than mainstream allopathic models. Medical cannabis within alternative medicine is more aligned to illegal cannabis circulations than pharmaceutical developments. It sits in the cross between non-personal cash exchange and building close social relationships as part of treatment. Yet in the future, alternative medicine cannabis practitioners are more likely to end up in a space of legal transgression than the global pharmaceuticals. The hierarchy of legal transgression is in part built upon a morally constructed hierarchy of societal institutions. When we hear about the cannabis economy on the news, they are not referring to forms of gift exchange or exchanges based in establishing strong social ties. Instead, that cannabis economy is aggressive capitalism based upon investment for monetary profit, product development and proliferation, and the creation of market opportunities. The influx of stock market and venture capital tells us that this moment of drug liberalisation follows a contemporary corporate model with outsourced government contracts. And for a non-addictive drug, a lot of people already use cannabis regularly, very regularly. But it will be in the interest of the industry to generate positive stories and positive web presence, widening marketing targets and encouraging us to consume more cannabis. In fact, cannabis will never have seemed so good. Yet research from Goldsmiths shows how in the gambling industry, much of the research is actually controlled by the gambling industry. In fact, almost all the research is controlled by the gambling industry. And that's why we think there are individual problem gamblers. We don't think that it's actually the industry devising ways of getting people to gamble more. in order to increase their profits. The alcohol and tobacco industries also have partisan research. Do we think the cannabis industry is going to be any different? Why would it? As cannabis becomes a more alienated commodity, disembedded from the social relations of illegal trading, we will find enjoyment in distinguishing our own consumer preferences in a differentiated market, just as we do when deciding between goods in Sainsbury's Basics range and the Sainsbury's Finest range. And we're going to do the same with cannabis. And then we'll have the fair trade tales of poor but happy peasants for whom quality just produces a more equitable economy. And we'll fill our heads just as it's done so in the current political economy, even though these tales promote product through a facade of significant social and economic change. And we embrace the market more and more, living a more commoditised life while drugging up to avoid the stress and alienation that that style of life produces. We are aware of the problems of pharmaceutical industries, but cheer on the new cannabis dispensaries as if they are benign and beneficial models of economy. Whilst we might worry about the implications on our bodies when taking medicines through Big Pharma, a regular dose of cannabis does not enter into the framework because it currently occupies the same political space as opposition to the farmers. But why the rush to medicate with cannabis? Cannabis is becoming the commoditised panacea of the counter-chemical movement. But when the plant is taken from its original herbal form, genetically modified and specific chemical compounds extracted from it to make concentrates in an expanding multi-million-dollar industry, shouldn't we step back for a moment? Cannabis has a socio-political meaning that is not confined to prohibition debates. You might think that the world of psychedelics would take you away from a commoditised culture, let you see what was happening to this world and change it. But then look what happens when you make the consumption of cannabis more accessible. You simply create more work and entertainment within the same confines as before. Cannabis is part of the leisure and bodily repair sectors. The vast majority of people who create that industry, the producers, the regulators and so on, do not run alternative economic models or radically different ways of life. Instead, they chase the same golden goose. So cannabis becomes another commodity regulated by state and industry alliances, although without major drug policy reform, there will always be areas of cannabis production and circulation that remain illegal. And giving back something to society, which is what it all seemed to be about, giving back something to society ultimately becomes the sanctioned and complete assimilation into the political and economic values of the dominant form of political economy. There is an intensification in the fragmentation of cannabis as a product and the fragmentation of international drug regulations. Whatever happens in the future, the meanings that we ascribe to cannabis and to our interactions with cannabis will take place within our culturing of particular forms of economy. Well done.